Man, I don't have any scary games. Except for this one, 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 except for this one again, except for this one, except for this one. Oh wait, this one isn't scary. Well, I guess we'll have to just talk about Half-Life. Oh wait, Half-Life isn't scary, only scarily overrated. Well, I guess that's it then. No October 31st Halloween extravaganza review. There's nothing to talk about. Man, these guys are stupid. Unless it's a commentary from 27 years ago in the past about how people in the future won't believe in a virus that's already killed millions of people even though it's staring them right in the face. Oh! While I may not care for the original Half-Life as much as other people do, it really can't be denied that it had a major impact on the modding community. If you aren't aware of what a mod is short for modification. These are usually fan-made and distributed through the internet. Mods make use of a game's engine to create an entirely new game or set of levels or other types of things. Mods are still very popular, but they are vastly different to what they were like in the 90s. The three main games that proper kicked off the modding scene would have had to have been Doom, Quake, and of course Half-Life. I would argue that mods back then, from the late 90s and into the 2000s, were more complex than they are now, with more mods being single-player focused or multiplayer. Nowadays mods are more focused on simple reskins or graphical enhancements. Half-Life has some of the most influential mods of all time. More than any other game ever, both Counter-Strike and Team Fortress started life as fan-made mods for the game, and we all know where they ended up. And there's smaller games, like Cry of Fear, that ended up on the Steam store. That's just scraping the surface of the Half-Life modding scene. I haven't even talked about Day of Defeat, Gunman Chronicles, Van Co-op, Science and Industry, The Specialists, and Heart of Evil. Okay, maybe not Heart of Evil. Half-Life had a lot of absolutely brilliant mods that had a resounding impact on the gaming scene, but I'm here to talk about what could be my favourite mod of all time. There's also a conveniently spooky mod for this time of year. Let's take a look.
You're listening to BMRF Radio. We interrupt this program to bring you a special news report. Unknown atmospheric phenomena have been reported throughout the area. Meteorologists have been unable to identify the source of the strange electrical displays, but we will keep you informed of any developments. We're returning now to our regular programming.
The Hunger opens with your main character driving through the peaceful Rockwell countryside before his car is struck by a bolt of lightning and careens into a nearby river. From here we make our way through some catacombs that make use of some very nice lighting, for a mod from 1999 anyway. We then get back outside, and can I just say that the skybox is beautiful. It may be low res, but it does a lot to set the mood. Upon reaching the church we saw earlier, the dead begin to rise from their graves in classic B-movie fashion. The rise of the dead forces us to take arms. What's our weapon of not very much choice? An umbrella. The game takes a swift turn into survival horror, albeit cheesy survival horror, as we come across undead cops who are still able to fire their guns with deadly precision. As we make our way through the countryside, we go through a lot of fun and impressive set pieces, especially for the time. We even come across the radio station we saw in the opening cutscene. We then make it to a nearby town as we seek the aid of the local police force, at least the ones that aren't trying to eat us. But in a surprise twist, well, that's overselling it, the police force has all been turned and are being led by an undead sheriff. We're put in a cell and await our fate. And that's the end of the first episode of They Hunger. Yeah, I probably should have mentioned that They Hunger was made as 3 separate episodes over the years of 1999 to 2001 by PC Gamer. PC Gamer was a magazine that would include discs that would have demos on them, and one of these discs would include the first episode of They Hunger. The game was developed by Black Widow Games that was formed in 1997 to make contractual mods for games. Another mod they put out for PC Gamer is the lesser known mod USS Darkstar. The second episode opens with you being rescued by a police officer that hasn't been turned by the undead horde. This second episode sees you leave the zombie-infested town and making your way through a zombie-infested sewer system, and then a zombie-infested countryside again, and then a zombie-infested asylum that leads us to discovering the cause behind the outbreak of zombies. The cause? Mad scientist. Very original. I'd risk saying the B-movie influence impacts the second episode of the trilogy the most, especially with the mad scientist trope. Though the tense atmosphere of the first episode is still strong, primarily while exploring the evil doctor's home. We also learn that the sheriff we saw at the end of the first episode is working in league with the doctor. Their goals? To take over the world.
Of course!
After fighting against the Doctor's undead experiments, we end up blowing up the insane asylum along with ourselves. Episode 3 opens with an odd cutscene involving the ghost of the evil Doctor, seeking vengeance. I guess we're going all paranormal now? Regardless of this opening, the very next segment is easily the best. We awake in a hospital bed. No idea what maniac rescued us from the flaming ruins, but thanks I guess. But this relief is short-lived, as when we wake up, we shortly discover that the hospital has been overrun by the living dead. Who'd have guessed? The hospital segment is awesome, being the last time the game actually tries to recreate the tense, foreboding atmosphere of the first episode that it was so good at creating. Sadly, I can't say the same for the rest of the episode. Episode 3 doesn't even try to be like a B-movie, it's just stupid. There's also a heck of a lot more backtracking in this episode too, and it doesn't even feel deserved, more like a boring attempt to make it longer. Thankfully, we're kidnapped by the undead sheriff and forced to attend a Trump rally. Politics. Luckily, the military arrive and in typical Half-Life fashion shoot everything that moves, including you. I'd argue that the gameplay takes a minor nosedive, as I've never cared for the combat in the original Half-Life, especially against enemies that make use of projectile weapons. After a lot of combat, we come across a human that doesn't immediately shoot us, assuring you that they have a ride out of town. This leads to a final battle with the Doctor, who has made the conscious decision to become Mecha Hitler. You see what I mean about it becoming just a little dumb here? After this epic final battle, we are rescued by our friendly helicopter man, and then we get to the final battle too with the zombie sheriff. Apparently, this boss battle was so hard when the game was first released. So hard it was impossible, meaning they had to release a patch to fix it. After this climactic final battle of death, you and your new best friend fly off into the sunset, and They Hunger comes to an end. Episode 3 feels lazy. I think the fact that the final boss was borderline broken speaks for itself. I have no idea if they were under a lot of stress due to a deadline, but they spent the same amount of time making this episode as they did the other two. Honestly, I don't know what happened. Overall, The Hunger is a very well polished game, at least today it is, but it does show its age in some places. At times it can be easy to get lost, especially in the insane asylum, and this type of level design is very indicative of the time period, though it does have the more modern trope of featuring a boring sewer segment. Episode 1 is easily the strongest of the three, with the best level design, atmosphere and combat. I love this episode the most, and it's the one I'm most nostalgic for, despite the cop enemies being a bit too tough at times. Gameplay goes largely unchanged from Half-Life, which is just fine up until the third episode that takes more focus on enemies that fire back. Weapons feel like simple reskins, which isn't too bad. They do look vastly different from the original Half-Life weapons, but they do also include new weapons, but they all sound exactly the same as the Half-Life guns. Speaking of being the same, enemies are almost entirely just reskins of Half-Life enemies, and this is fine. A majority of the more extravagant monsters have their behaviours massively altered, enough for them to feel completely different at least. Visually, enemies look completely different to their Half-Life counterparts, aside from Asylum security guards who still have the Black Mesa Research Facility logo on their vests. The game also just reuses both head crabs and barnacles. I think the head crabs are supposed to be severed heads, but you can barely tell. There are other mods for this mod that gives the game more detailed character models, like the ones Half-Life got with the Blue Shift expansion pack. Personally, they're not for me, as they look out of place with the simple Gold Source engine graphics. The Hunger is flawed, but it has charm. It's an endless, juicy bucket of charm. The crap voice acting, especially the sheriff's voice, is hilarious. Its B-movie roots definitely help add to the charm. For a mod made in the late 90s, early 2000s, it's quite polished. It's also got great pacing, at least in the stellar first episode. Is The Hunger the greatest mod of all time? No, but that doesn't stop it from being my favourite. It succeeds at being spooky, and sometimes that's all you need to have a good time, but sadly, the story of The Hunger doesn't have a very happy ending. A sequel was planned for The Hunger, dubbed The Hunger Lost Souls, and was being developed for Source, Half-Life 2's engine, but by 2008, development stopped and it hasn't resumed in 12 years. The main developer, Neil Mankey, apparently lost interest, meaning everyone else lost interest too. Neil eventually faded into obscurity, disappearing from the internet, and The Hunger fans were left with only a few screenshots of what looked like an amazing new mod. Though, it's not all bad, I guess. 2 betas for Lost Souls leaked in January of this year, and I heard that Neil isn't dead after all. Do I think this means that The Hunger's coming back? No. Something will eventually happen, but who'll be behind it is a mystery. There was an early demo of a remake released back in 2016, but after overwhelmingly negative fan response, development on this mod has also ceased. Regardless of what the future holds for the series, we'll always have the original, The Hunger. Now, seeing as I'm really in the spirit of Halloween, I'm going to go meet up with my friends to sacrifice a small dog to a Lovecraftian god whose name cannot be uttered by our mere mortal tongues. So, have a happy Halloween, and I'll see you in the next video game or movie review.
I smell you around the corner, ripe and ready for eating. In the gutter you will soon be bleeding. I am your only mourner. You are what I eat. So much flesh, so much meat. With my hands your skull I will beat. Leave your carcass in the street.